Good morning. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could join us. We are here today with Phil Harriman, former state senator and Yarmouth town councilor. Good to see you.
Good morning, Pat.
And former state senator and mayor of Portland, Ethan Strimling.
Good
nice
to see you. Good morning. Yeah, hope you had a good summer.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
There's lots cooking, so let's get right to it. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin campaigned in Maine for Republican candidate for Governor Paul LePage this week. Now, Youngkin flipped Virginia red in part by embracing the backlash over pandemic education policies. Ethan, is that a playbook that Paul LePage can use, and do endorsements like this really sway anybody?
No. In a word, they don't. And they're good for fundraising. They're good for the base. They get people fired up. Obviously, these are complicated issues sometimes for these candidates, as we've now seen with Youngkin, where he's having to answer questions about some of LePage's racist comments in the past. He's gone back home, and his constituents are saying, how would you support a guy like that? He's trying to claim that LePage is a uniter. I don't think even LePage would say that he's a uniter. He's somebody who goes in and fights for what he believes in, and for better or worse, people like that. But in short, no, this endorsement's not going to do anything for LePage.
I think Ethan actually has got it summed up just about right. I think if you're going to bring some celebrity politician into Maine, it's to energize the people who are supporting you and get them fired up to help you with your campaign. Paul LePage hopefully has learned that these sarcastic remarks that get interpreted as racism need to be distinguished. In fact, Paul LePage welcomed a young Jamaican boy into his family and helped him get an education at Husson University. So the Paul LePage I know is not a racist, but the comments he makes ad lib obviously is good fodder for the media.
It's not that these comments get interpreted as racism. Those comments are racist, and he's had to apologize for some of them and take them back because they were. So let's not mince words that somebody out there is spinning what he says. He said what he said. We got to call it out for what it is.
Senator Susan Collins is pushing for the Respect for Marriage Act in Washington. It's a bipartisan effort to codify into law same-sex and interracial marriage. Now, these are matters that most have viewed as settled, but then Roe versus Wade was overturned after 50 years. So, Phil, what do you think are the chances of this passing, and what does it say that it's necessary for something that has existed for a long time to have to be put into law like this?
Yeah, I think for people who are living in fear that their lifestyle is somehow, to be scorned is important for us as a society to recognize that they have rights as well. From an election point of view, I don't see this passing before November. We're likely to see a whole new congressional delegation. So I think, as we are this morning on the Political Brew, it gives us something to talk about, but I don't think any action is going to be implemented immediately.
I think there's a chance it'll pass. I'm glad that Senator Collins is doing this with Senator Tammy Baldwin. It's very important that we bring it forward. Senator Collins obviously has a lot to answer to, since 4 of the 5 Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe, that signed on to the opinion that Clarence Thomas wrote, that said we could now overturn things like equal marriage or contraception. She's got to answer to that, and so she's now stepping up. Good for her. It sounds like they've got some bipartisan support. I hope that they are able to pass something.
And in fact, while only 3 Republicans have publicly said they will support it, it's believed there are others who are holding their fire, so to speak, until the actual vote comes. In case it doesn't come up to a vote, they don't want to be out on that limb if they don't have to be.
Yeah, so. For sure. And remember, one who said they had supported it before, Ron Johnson out in Wyoming, has now flipped and said he won't. So Phil's prediction may come true in that sense.
Lobster is becoming a political issue, and not just the now infamous Jared Golden ad in which he demolishes a lobster as a metaphor for blocking excessive government spending. The LePage campaign is trying to blame Janet Mills for policies that have damaged Maine's lobster industry. And in the 2nd District, Bruce Poliquin's campaign is hitting Congressman Jared Golden for not supporting the important industry well enough. Ethan, is this going to give Republicans some traction? Is this an issue that causes problems for the Democrats?
No, I mean, this is really a federal issue, and I don't think anybody's going to blame Jared Golden. He's been a strong fighter to try to make sure that the lobster industry has what it needs, but also remember there's a lot of environmentalists out there who are on the side of the whales in this, so I think it's a trade-off either way, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to pin whatever problem they see on Mills or Golden. That's a stretch.
I have to acknowledge that these sound bites that we're talking about directed at the elected officials really should be directed at the regulators. These are the people who promulgate these rules that are unelected, essentially unaccounted for. They're the ones that have brought this conversation forward. And as Ethan and I know from our time in the Maine Senate, if the regulators run too far ahead of you, you got to put in legislation to rein him back in, and maybe that's what they need to do.
Will Democrats get a boost from the Roe versus Wade fallout? Governor LePage has said he has no reason to try to repeal Maine's law protecting the right to abortion until fetal viability, and it would take a GOP majority in the legislature to even consider it. But LePage has been a consistent opponent of abortion rights. So, Phil, are Democrats going to be able to, make this an important issue come time to cast ballots?
Well, I think they are, regardless of Governor LePage's position. This is an issue that strikes a nerve, and I think you're going to find people on both sides, pro-life and pro-choice, who are going to come vote because of this decision. I think as Paul LePage, as we all remember, at one time he had control of the House and the Senate when he was governor. He made no effort to overturn existing Maine reproductive rights laws, and he has stated already in the campaign that this abortion issue affects a very few group of people in Maine. The Maine economy affects everyone, and that's what he's going to focus on.
But he, of course, would like this to go away, and so would Bruce Poliquin, who has not said if a federal ban were proposed, would he support it, and that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, look, LePage may have not done anything when he was governor, but Roe v. Wade still stood at that time, and the state is pro-choice, and it's still pro-choice. So this is going to be problematic, and yes, it has fired up a lot of voters around the country. We've seen in Kansas, where they voted down what would have allowed them to restrict abortion overwhelmingly, a Republican state. We saw in Alaska, Sarah Palin, a die-hard anti-abortion candidate, lose to somebody who is pro-abortion, and so we're seeing it all over the country, and I think it will happen here. I think there are people who are saying, I spoke to people who once Roe v. Wade went over, said, you know what, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do here, but I'll tell you what, I'm not going to vote for anybody who might take away the right of women to be able to control their own bodies. So I think it's very problematic for Poliquin, very problematic for LePage.
Bruce Poliquin lost his seat in Congress 4 years ago in a ranked choice vote count. He had led in the first round, then was edged out by Jared Golden when second choice votes were applied. Then Governor LePage signed the election certification but wrote "stolen election" on the document. So now Poliquin faces another election in which ranked choice voting is a factor. In a radio interview this week, he acknowledged that the election will be safe and secure. But Phil, is Poliquin pursuing a strategy that can attract second choice votes, which is something in this race you probably are going to need?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, Pat. The whole ranked choice voting was to create a more congenial relationship between candidates, and if Bruce is using this as an opportunity to say, if I'm not your first choice, I should be your second choice, and here's why.
But you got to recognize the math. He's got to play for 50% on the first ballot. Both the other candidates are to the left. Jared Golden's not going to come in third. Tiffany Bond's the only one who's going to come in third, so maybe he tries to get some of those votes, but most likely people who vote for her are going to end up voting for Jared or just not vote for a second. So I think Poliquin's entire play is he needs to get over 50% on that first ballot and/or hope that Bond's votes just don't vote for anybody the second time through.
A judge has agreed to former President Donald Trump's request for a special master to review government documents taken by the FBI from Trump's home in Florida. This means the Justice Department had to stop reviewing the secret documents as they look to see whether there's a criminal case against the former president. The Justice Department is appealing that order, but Ethan, the question is, does all of this, the special master and the delay, change the way this is ultimately going to play out?
Well, it's going to delay a criminal investigation that compromised national security. So that's a real problem. And hopefully, I'm glad that they're appealing. And although 6 of the 11 judges at the next level were appointed by Trump, I hope that they will rise to the occasion. This has already been adjudicated, right? When Richard Nixon tried to say that I want executive privilege, I get to keep my tapes, the Supreme Court smacked him down, said, I'm sorry, if you commit crimes, you don't get executive privilege with those documents. That's clear what's happened here. 100 of these documents, national security, some of them the highest level of national security mixed in, empty folders. This criminal investigation needs to go forward as quickly as possible and for the sake of our national security, and hopefully the court will see that.
Is the special master decision the right way to go, just to make sure everything is done in order?
Yeah, I do, because the accusation is that the government raided his home and went through far too much of his personal effects to conduct this raid. I think a special master needs to be able to say, yes, here are the things that you can claim and here are the things that you can't. But to Ethan's point, much of that research has already been done. And I find it remarkable, Pat, that because of the secret, sensitive nature of this information, why are there so many leaks coming out of the Department of Justice into the national media? It doesn't seem right to me.
Well, there aren't leaks of the actual information, right? The only thing that's coming out is descriptions, and some of it's coming from the court filings because Trump keeps trying to block this, so the Department of Justice is like, okay, we're going to file yet another thing. So they posted a picture showing all these documents on the floor. Now, obviously, they were blacked out, so nobody's leaking the actual
Those documents weren't put on the floor by Donald Trump. They were put there by the people who raided his home.
Of course,
giving
but they were
the
in
impression
his house.
that he put them on the floor.
Well, but he even admitted he had them. He then said, oh, I didn't put those on the floor, meaning that, oh, yes, I did have them in the closet, which is just as problematic. They don't have to be on the floor to be illegal. It's illegal to own them at all.
Why are we seeing leaks into the media when the Attorney General could step to the podium and declare, here's in general the information that we have? Instead, it's being leaked through anonymous sources.
He has. He stood up, and as I said, these are coming from filings in the court because Trump keeps extending this thing out. But Merrick Garland has stood up at a podium and said, here's what's going on, but it's a criminal investigation. They can't give us the documents, nor should they, because they're national security. That would happen in a trial.
President Biden has been getting more confrontational as midterms approach, saying Republicans loyal to Donald Trump, the so-called MAGA Republicans, pose a threat to this country. Ethan, is this going to help Democratic prospects in the midterms? Some are saying Biden is being intentionally divisive here.
I think it will help. I mean, I think what people are seeing is that Biden has said, you know, none of us can stand by while this is going on. This is somebody who has threatened the national security, as we were just discussing, somebody who incited a riot. This is somebody that we have to take very seriously and who is working very hard to try to get back to the White House in 2024, trying to win races of Secretary of State seats around the country, who can then overturn election results on his behalf. This is a very serious threat, and I think that Joe Biden is standing up to that threat, and I think people in the country are responding and saying, yes, thank you. You are our president. You should lead.
And Phil, you have pointed out rightly that Joe Biden ran on a platform of being a uniter, someone to bring people together. But is it smart politics for him to do this right now, given the state of the midterm elections coming up?
Well, I think what is telling to me that he used that address in front of the Continental Hall to talk about the threat to America of the 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump, that somehow they're the threat to America, when he could have used it maybe to make that point of his concern, but to talk about his student loans in Afghanistan and the border crossings and energy policy. He tossed all of that aside, which I think are what's really frustrating and concerning to American voters as we head towards the November election.
Yeah, he's given speeches about all that stuff. I've seen them all, and they've been good. And this speech was specifically about the threat to our democracy. So this was not a speech about student loans or any of that. It was about a threat to our democracy. He needed to give the speech. I hope he keeps giving it until we figure out how to end the threat of Donald Trump.
A federal judge ruled this past week that required coverage of HIV prevention drugs under the Affordable Care Act violates the religious beliefs of a Texas employer and undercuts the broader system that determines which preventive drugs are covered in the U.S. And there have been other cases brought by institutions claiming their right to religious freedom entitles them to refuse to comply with certain anti-discrimination laws. Phil, have we reached a point where religious belief has become an excuse to discriminate?
I wouldn't go that far, Pat. I think what we're realizing is that in our Constitution there is clear communication to the federal government. Remember, the Constitution isn't to limit we the people, it's to limit the power of the federal government. And in this instance, the justices are saying the federal government does not have the right to tell religious organizations what their beliefs should be. So if this is underlying in a growing concern, this has either got to be a constitutional amendment or a federal law that's introduced.
Well, it's already a federal law. That's the whole point. And they've gone into the court. And this judge, unfortunately, has had it out for this law. This is not the first ruling that the judge has had on this. But to your question, look, religious beliefs people have tried to use as an excuse to discriminate against people for centuries in this country, unfortunately. And our courts have constantly said, no, you may not. And especially the government may not. You must treat people equally. And while you in your house may decide that you don't want to have a black person come in your house, I'm sorry, if you have a public institution, you must allow everybody into that public institution, and you must try to provide the kind of health care that everybody needs. You don't get to decide that, I don't get to decide because of my religious belief what health care he gets. He shouldn't be able to decide what health care I get. We should both get whatever we need.
Let's wrap up, as we always do, with our winners and losers in politics this week. And Phil, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Pat. My loser this week is the leaders of the city of Portland, who have yet to be able to come up with a solution to the gun violence and the drugs and the homelessness that we see through one of their most pristine landscapes, Deering Oak Parks. My winner of the week is the legacy of Queen Elizabeth. For over 70 years, she was a beacon of class and graciousness, and the world knew her and loved her.
Ethan?
King Charles III.
Yes, it's going to be hard to get used to.
Yes, I know. My losers, non-political, are all the students who ended their summer vacation last week and now had to go back to school. And of course, the winners, those parents who finally get their kids to go back to school and can enjoy the fall.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's going to do for News Center Maine's Political Brew. We'll see you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.